Okay, cool. Hi, everyone, and welcome to UX Insiders. For anybody who is attending for the first time, my name is Rachel. I'm a researcher here at the UX Design Institute. So UX Insiders is a series of live events that we host by us, and for each event, we are joined by some of the most interesting people working in UX right now. And we run this series just to give you all a little bit of insight into what it's like to actually work in the field of UX. So today we're really lucky to be joined by Alexis Oh, who is a product designer with IKEA. And we're also very proud to say that Alexis is a graduate of our own professional diploma in UX design. Alexis also now works as a mentor on the course. And today, Alexis is going to talk to us about some of the differences and similarities between designing for startups and large-scale organizations. And she's going to highlight some of the unique challenges and opportunities of each approach. So we're really excited to hear from Alexis. Before we officially begin the event, I'm just going to explain a little bit about how you can interact with us during the webinar. So if you want to say hello and introduce yourself, you can use the chat function. If you want to click in there. But if you have any questions for Alexis, please use the questions box. It just means that we can see the questions and you can upvote them if you see a question that you're particularly interested in. So just give it a vote and we'll know it's one that people are looking for an answer on. We also have two really exciting announcements that we want to make. The first is that we are launching a new course. It has just officially launched, and it is a professional certificate in content design. This is a university credit-rated course, like all of our courses, and it covers everything you need to start a career in content design. The course runs for 10 weeks and is online, so you can complete it at your own time. And like our other courses, there is a live element as well with live webinars. So we're going to share some links to this course in the chat box in case you would like to find out a little bit more about the course. You can also always book a call with one of our education advisors who will be really happy to talk to you about content design and whether it is a good career for you. The second announcement we have then is that we are running a workshop later this month. This is called Better UX Design with AI. We're really, really excited about this one given how important AI is right now in the UX industry. So this will be a hands-on practical workshop, and it will show you how to use AI to become a better designer. The workshop will be hosted by Nick Babbage, who is a principal UX designer at Brain Technologies, and he is an AI expert. So we're really excited to be running that. Okay. So they are our announcements. So now that those are out of the way, I'm going to officially introduce our guest for this evening. Alexis, you're very welcome to UX Insiders. We're really happy to have you. I know that you have a presentation prepared for us today, so I will hand over to you whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I do this with all my classes as well, but let's do a quick check-in. I've had a very long day, very long week. Today my internet just sort of crashed. I almost couldn't make it. Work's been crazy. So let's check in. Red, yellow, green. Red if you're feeling a little bit worn out and down, and green if you're feeling good, and yellow is sort of in between. Just put it in the chat just so I can gauge what the energy is like while I figure out how to share my screen. Yellow, green, quite a few greens. Oh, quite a few. Excited too. I'm not good at maths, but I'm going to say more greens than anything else just because I see a lot of greens. Something between the two colors. I can relate, but thank you for indulging me in that. You can continue to do that while I reshare my screen because I shared the wrong screen. There we go. Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Alexis, and I work at IKEA as a product UX designer. And today I kind of want to talk to you about designing across scales. And a very easy way to think about that is the scale, the size of the company, so from startup to enterprise. And I'll go through that. it's an interesting topic. It's something that I personally was interested in and curious about, but didn't know how to think about it, how to approach it until I had some back-to-back experiences. But before I jump into what you can expect, just this is the breakdown of what we're going to talk about today. It's really simple. I'm going to introduce what I mean by scales, going to take you through my journey and some key takeaways that we can have. And at the end, we'll save space for a Q&A. So it's not much, but hopefully there is some value in all of this. But if we go back to what I said earlier, talking about scales, what do we mean? And I want to call out that the way we think about the sizes of companies tends to be like startup versus big tech. And big tech is only one of many types of big companies, because big tech, their predominant product and their core thing is technology. But there are other companies like banks, for example, or e-commerce sites, retail. They have started to go into digital transformation, have started to embrace technology. And oftentimes those companies are a lot bigger than big tech as well. So just want to be mindful that when we think of that scale, it's not just startup versus like Fang or Mang or whatever type companies, but there's so much more that exists just because of the proliferation of digital. But a bit about how I'm going to anchor this entire presentation. I'm using my experience as the scale here, and I've had the, I guess, fortune, I don't know how you want to put it, but of working in a startup followed by a very large enterprise back to back. So I started and organized as the first designer. And we had about more than 10 employees, less than 20, give or take, with the contractors and freelancers. We had one core product and we worked in two core markets, the UK and the US. So that's sort of the scale, and that's a seed stage company, so fairly small and nimble. Right now I work at IKEA. We have more than 200 designers. I'm sure the number is much, much higher, but I'm not even going to count it. More than 200,000 employees as of last year, I think. And this is, of course, I can't verify numbers either because it's a lot more. We have a lot of products, not just the ones you see on the website and the app, but also internal products, supply chain, logistics, multiple data visualization products. It's endless. And we work globally. So IKEA is kind of a household name, and you know that this goes everywhere. So we serve not just like a global market. Each country has a tailor-made solution based on their local legislation, their context, and things like that. So as you can see, the complexity kind of scales up. It's not to say that startups are less complicated. They are complicated in a different way, I would say. But this is just to illustrate what I mean by scale. But before I go deeper, my story. I actually practiced as an architect before I moved into UX design. And so how I think about the problems in design and tech, it's very similar to how I used to approach architectural problems. I think a lot in scales, and just as when you have to design a building or a space, you don't just start by randomly building forms. You have to kind of understand the city that you're in, the context, what are the buildings it's next to, what are legislations, the different systems that exist, energy, water, waste, and things like that, the history, the cultural context, everything has to be taken in consideration before you sort of go from a very large urban scale down to the scale of a building, to the scale of like a detail of a window or how the wall meets the floor. And that's how I think, and that has sort of influenced the choices I made and where I chose to apply to the things that I was interested in, right? So my journey is a bit messy. When I quit architecture, I immediately started freelancing, or I started freelancing a little bit before I quit architecture, and I tried a lot of things. I actually didn't land into UX design right away. I forgot that the UX design existed. I don't know why. You have these moments and your brain just shuts down. And so I did a bunch of other things around design and tech, creative coding. I tried web design. I tried webflow design. I tried brand strategy. I tried prototyping. I even tried editorial, which is completely analog, and sort of did different things. And that I could do that because I was freelancing. So you can choose your clients, right? So tried different things. Ended up somehow by chance in UX and really liked it. My first, I guess, big milestone, I think, is I got a contract to work with Elise West Design, who is a designer for WHO and UNICEF. So that was sort of my first big foray into UX design where it was more formal. I actually worked as a UX design hybrid product manager. So I wore multiple hats. I worked with a global client, I worked with an NGO, and they had very interesting ways of working. So that's my base, and that set me up to be very interested in things that are a bit bigger than ourselves. I like complicated problems. I like things that are messy and interrelated with a bunch of other different things. From there, I went on to become the first designer at Organize. And I don't know how many of you are already working or have experience in a startup. Being the first designer is hard. It requires setting up a lot of things. It requires a lot of conviction. It requires you to lead even when you're not ready. So that was my setup. And now I'm a designer, one of many, many, many designers at IKEA. And that's a complete different shift. And really what I want to show here is this red thread. It goes through the experiences. And you might think that, I've tried lots of different things and more that is not on the screen, but they all sort of come back in mysterious and magical ways. So I never thought that my writing foray would ever come back, but it has in sense of like, I use it when I communicate internally. I use it when I try to write product strategy. I use it when I talk to stakeholders. So the point of that is just to remind you that, your journey might be messy, but all these experiences will come back and help you in ways that you cannot even imagine or predict. Now, if we focus on the startup, why do any of us join startups? One, of course, maybe that's the only option. Maybe that's the easiest option to enter. That's often the case. But most of us join startups because we're drawn by the mission. Every startup has a very strong mission and vision. Hopefully they do. Otherwise, you probably shouldn't join. And most of us are, pulled in by this allure and this like promise of changing the world and changing the lives of users and making an impact. But really, startups, if we're realistic, are growing things. They don't always have everything figured out. And while they might have a mission, it's very easy to get enticed by that and forget that it is still growing, it is still changing, and nothing is fixed. And if I had to sum up my time at a startup, this would be it. Like, it was a lot of going really quickly, sometimes running in circles, not realizing I was running in circles, building fast and breaking things. And if I looked at the kinds of work that I did there, you really do everything. Of course, I can't show too much here because then I would be giving you my case studies. But you do a little bit of design. You touch a little bit on design systems. You build and you spec for developers. But you also look at research. You talk to stakeholders. You do product roadmap strategies. You do flows and multiple different things. So the kind of work you do isn't just limited to any one sphere. Right, so that's the startup journey. It's a bit messy and a bit all over the place. Whereas if you go into enterprise, like why I felt that with enterprise, what I wanted was impact, right? I felt like at the startup I was at, I couldn't really scale in a way that I wanted to. I want to learn about business. I wanted to learn about how design influences business and what impact it has. So that's kind of why I joined IKEA. But just similar to startups where you have the mission and the flip side is it drains you, in enterprise, you're fueled by the impact, but you're also blocked by the scale of it. So this is a little bit of my experience. And if I had to summarize my work at enterprise at these kind of really big companies, it truly is this meme of like, there are so many meetings, and this statement of like, let's sync to make sure that we're aligned is not, it's almost like you're not saying anything, but you have to say it anyway. So that's kind of my experience, and I'm being a bit cynical in that I'm sort of highlighting the pros but also the cons of working these places, because I think it's important to know. And earlier I showed you this, this is what we do at a startup, holding a lot of different things, wearing a lot of different hats, working on things simultaneously. I want to show you what the difference is with working at a place like IKEA. So this is, if you go on an IKEA website, this is what you see. I didn't take the screenshot of the whole page, but this is more or less it, right? It's just this really long page of all these different things. Maybe very quickly in the chat, can you guess how many product teams are working on just this website? Now we'll pause for dramatic effect. I see 3, 50, 45, 90, around 30, 5, 10. Right. So before I even get started, just on the homepage, on the top of the screen, these are all different product teams. You have one for navigation, you have one for login and profile, you have one for favorites, you have one for search, find, you have one for the product itself. So you really do have a lot of them. And that's the kind of the complex, this is one level of complexity. And this is just a website. And I took a random website, right? I took the UK's website, but you have a website per country. And this is just a website. What about the app? What about like internal products? What about any other facing products? There's so many different layers to consider and they're all intertwined. And globally, like we don't even serve all the countries in the world, but the blue ones are the current market locations. The red ones are sort of, that's Russia, but let's not go there. The yellow ones are future locations. So what you see on this website, like the amount of work that goes into just putting one thing together, that's just for now. What about the future facing work? What about discoveries, concepts of future designs? Now we have AI that's completely disrupting everything. How many product teams are going to look into that? So that's just to illustrate the scale and complexity. And I'm not saying startups are not complex, because if you look at the startup work that I showed here, which is now not showing because my internet is slow, you look at it, it's complex in the sense that you have to do a lot of different things. And most of the time you're building from nothing to something, so 0 to 1. Whereas in these larger enterprise places, it's not about building this really cool thing, but it's about how you can enable and build at scale, how you can enable all these different teams to work at the same pace to affect each other. So that's just an illustration. And now my screen is back, thank goodness. Internet's very slow today because they canceled my internet this morning before giving me my new internet. So I am using hotspot. Let's see if this entire thing crashes and burns. But anyway, so that was just like an illustration of what I mean by complexity and what it is in comparison. And Arpita, I think you asked if you cannot see any product team in the red card. It's not meant to show you the product team because then I'll be going really deep into like how IKEA works, and that's not really what the point is. So the red boxes are just red boxes. Some challenges that you will have with the startups, you will wear many hats, so many hats. They'll keep giving you hats. They'll make up new hats. It'll never stop. And on the enterprise side, you have an assigned hat that a lot of other people also have. So the gravity of that is that on one hand, you have maybe too much to do, but complete freedom. And on the other side, you have a very clear scope, but then your challenge is how do you navigate working with others? How do you navigate overlapping boundaries? How do you navigate aligning with everyone, making sure that what you're doing is not repeated by someone else? And that happens a lot. So this is one of the challenges in terms of scope. The next one is, the speed at which you work. So at a startup, a very common phrase in most startups is like, let's just ship it. Let's just get it out there and we'll fix it later. Move fast and break things, right? We'll fix it later. It's fine. We want to ship and we want to learn. And in enterprise, it's the converse. It's almost like you have to make decisions by consensus. You have to make sure the right people are informed and consulted and looped in. So you will have a lot of meetings just to get everyone on the same page. And the phrase you hear a lot is let's get buy-in. And these are two very extreme ends of the scale, but they are a very real problem. And the last, and I think the most pervasive problem is really like, am I good enough? And I feel like this is one of the few things that goes across scales. It really doesn't matter what scale you're working at. This question always comes up. And I don't know if it's a designer trait to have, but most designers I've met, if not all, have asked this question at one point or another. So if I were to like trace backwards and like look at the things that we've talked about, how can you, like, what are the opportunities for you to leverage whatever stage you're in, whether startup or enterprise? The first takeaway is, focus on the experience. You're a UX designer. You are a specialist in design. You work on design. You think about the user. You think about where they're coming from. And that's really your core thing. It's very easy in a startup where you're wearing multiple hats to get distracted and start thinking about, okay, I need to build a product roadmap. I have to start to think about marketing, the landing page for the website. That's all well and good, but your focus is the user's experience at the end of the day. And there's a little diagram here that I like to use to think about, especially products. We always talk about, like, is it feasible to build? Is it viable to build? But really, from a designer's point of view, everything should start with, is it desirable for people to, if you build this? So this is one key takeaway, and let that sink in. If you ever feel overwhelmed and you ever feel like, there are too many things to do, or things aren't moving quickly enough and you don't know how to change things, focus on an experience and start there. The second is easier said than done, and I'm still learning this myself, but it's to design for impact and not just movement. What do we mean by design for impact? Impact means multiple different things, and you kind of have to figure what that is for your company. What is it that your company is doing? What is their core mission? What is their core vision? How can you do it in a way that helps them achieve their goals? And when I say not just for movement, it's also that we have a tendency to sort of go really quickly at a startup, and in the bigger enterprises to just do stuff because it's been done before. And that's what I mean by movement. Movement is just sort of you're moving without direction. If you're going to design something, make sure you know where you're going, what direction it's heading to, and design for impact and not just to look busy. And finally, I think the most important thing that, we all say, but it's worth reminding yourself for, that it's important to have this growth mindset. It's important to always, always keep learning and never stop. I mean, you look at this whole AI movement, it is going to change and disrupt a lot of industries. It's going to change the way we do things. It is already changing the way we do things. We need to constantly keep up, and sometimes it might feel like it's a lot of things to do, but that's part of the beauty of working in the tech industry, right? That you're sort of at the forefront of all these big paradigm shifts. You're at the forefront of changes, and that is a really, really, that's a luxury to have. Not everyone has it. I come from architecture, and architecture is at least a decade behind in all these things. And it's frustrating when you see the rest of the world moving forward and you're standing still. So this is one of those things that, you find on a calendar, like a motivational quote, but it's important. So with that, I'm going to end. And this is where the Q&A starts. So feel free to ask me anything. And I can go back and explain things if it wasn't clear. But I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much for that, Alexis. It was great. Really, really interesting to see some of the differences you've pointed out there. And I think, going by the chat anyway, they've definitely resonated with people who have experience working at one or the other. A couple of questions coming through, but I'd like to start with one, if you don't mind, which is just, what does a typical day look like for you working as a product designer at IKEA? What kind of projects do you work on? Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is a typical answer. It depends. For me, I am specifically in the sales, selling, and payments team. So I work in that context, and I'm a horizontal designer, which means I'm not attached to any one product team. I work kind of cross-functionally across multiple product teams. So my day-to-day looks very different from, for example, a designer that is working on one of these areas in the product. So if I go back to this thing, for example, if you're working on the search team, your day-to-day looks very different because everything you do is about search, whereas I kind of go across. If I can generalize the day-to-day in comparison with my day-to-day in the startup, at IKEA, like, my day is mostly meetings. And we're trying to change this, but it is part of being in a big organization. You do have to, we're a hybrid company as well, so we work mostly remotely. My teammates are in Sweden, they're in Spain, they're in the US, China, and multiple different places. So you can't avoid going on meetings because you do need some sort of human connection. You do need to speak. Sometimes that's easier than just writing documents all day. So mostly meetings, but a lot of workshopping, a lot of discovery, a lot of sort of trying to find how we can avoid doing duplicate work. And that's usually the challenges of big companies, that people tend to end up doing duplicate work because it's so big and so vast, and you have no idea like who is doing what, even if it's documented somewhere. Because imagine 200 plus, that's just design. not including engineers, not including product, not including data and data analysts, not including like conversion rate optim. Like it's not including a lot of different parts. And if you put that all together, it's a different scale. So yeah, meetings all day long.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And this visual is amazing for just explaining kind of the complexity of what's involved in maintaining a website like IKEA's. There is a question from one person who is viewing, which is just wondering, would it be a bit boring just working on a, say, a login screen all day every day? Or how do you keep, how would somebody stay interested in that or find creativity?
All right. So very good question. I think my take on it before going in was like I sort of accepted my fate. Like I'm just going to work on a very tiny thing, and that's okay because it's a big company and I will learn stuff. This graphic of the world, just want to bring that back in. Yes, you are designing login, but you are designing login for the entire, like all the different countries, which all one have different languages, two different contexts, three different legal legislation. So GDPR is in Europe, but what about in the US? What about in China? Four different infrastructure, five different, like multiple layers of complexity on that end. And on the other end, if you look at the word login, what do we mean by login? That implies that there is a profile. Where does the login button exist? Is it just on a home page? Is it when you check out? Is it when you've bought something in the email? So it's from the outside, it seems like any one of these are just like, oh, it's just a website and you can get components of Webflow and you can build it really quickly. And sure, you can make it look the same, but the complexity is in the scale that it reaches and in how interconnected everything is. So if you want to design a login flow, you probably have to talk to, for example, if you want to put in the login button at checkout, you have to talk to the checkout team. If you wanted to put a login button when people are already viewing a product, you have to talk to the physical product team. If you want to put a login like in a search result page, you have to talk to the search team. So yes, it is just one thing, but that one thing will be sort of the scope.
Yeah. Okay, great. That makes sense. Alexis, I might ask you if possible maybe to stop sharing your screen now, unless you need
Yes,
it,
of course.
just to help the internet stream, if that's okay. Perfect. Okay, that makes sense. And I think when you explain it like that, you can kind of see already how it's really not just a login screen. I know it's a bit of a cliche to say it's not just a button, but so yeah, I guess another question we have here is just around the different kind of traits or skill sets you might need to work, say, freelance versus for a startup versus for a big tech company. Are there kind of different personality styles or traits or skill sets that you might need, or do they kind of overlap mostly?
It always depends on like the industry and the type and everything, but I do find there are certain key differences. So for example, in a freelance world, about 50% of your time, probably more, at least it was the case for me, especially in the beginning, was sourcing clients, pitching and tendering for jobs, like just trying to get anything. And a lot of my anxiety was less about the project work and more about, am I going to get paid this month? Can I find a project? And is this like, you don't even, at that point, I wasn't even thinking like, is this something I would like to do? Because I was worried about surviving and getting enough clients. When you're in a startup, there are a couple things. It's really exciting. So you have to be okay with not having a fixed script because you don't know what your startup is like. You don't know what your founders are like. You don't know the team you're working with, their competencies and stuff. So you might, for example, if there's not really a product person, you might have to step into that role. If the developers aren't well versed in like the UI engineering, for example, like interactions and transitions, you might have to step into a role if that's something you want to do. So in that sense, for startups, there is a degree of like flexibility needed, and you have to be okay with that. And in bigger companies, honestly, like because it's a big company and there's a role for everyone, the likelihood of you finding something is higher. But the flip side is you have to be okay with bureaucracy and things moving a little bit slower. And you have to be okay that you have to involve other people. You can't just be a lone ranger and think you're a superstar and just like bulldoze through everyone, because at the end of the day, it's like this huge machine and you're just one part of it. So those are the things that stick out to me, I think, if you look across all three types of experiences.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, great. And another question we have here is, do you often get asked to do things or design things that end up not being used?
All the time. But I feel like that's the same across all three experiences. So when you're freelancing, depending on the types of clients you get, you are designing and you're handing it over to the client. So you're not going to be there to see they build it, because that's not the assignment. Very rarely would you get that kind of freelance client where you get to see things end to end. So in that sense, you could argue that everything you design is not going to be built. You don't know. In the startup, you could design, let's say, a really cool product with 5 features, but the startup only has budget to hire 2 engineers and they can only build 1 feature in the time that you need. So you could argue there as well, whatever you design is probably not going to get built. And same for the enterprise scale. At that scale, you're sort of looking at a billion different things at once, you and a lot of other teams. And the stuff that eventually gets built, it's the ones that are prioritized to the company's like metrics and OKRs and their objectives, their vision. So there is a business element to it. Like, is this going to make the cut? So in all 3 parts, I would say that exists anyway, but it just depends on like what factor are they using to decide whether or not you build it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Okay, great. And thank you, Alexis. I know we're jumping around from topic to topic, but I think this is great. We're getting lots of questions in, and I'm sure everybody is really glad to have their questions answered. Another one we have here is about a portfolio and whether you can build a decent portfolio when you're working at a large organization, or is the focus too narrow within that context to really showcase your skills?
Building a good portfolio is quite personal. I feel like it's just as difficult to build a difficult one in a startup as it is in a big company. But I see where the question is coming from. So if, let's say, you are in a big company and you end up on a product team working on a really niche feature or a really niche problem, it might seem like, it's just making the CTA sticky, or like surfacing a new little like indication that something has went wrong, or changing the error states, or adding a new button or something. And it seems really small, but at a big company, the things that led up to that one button or that one piece of text or that one color change is usually quite extensive. And if you can document that and explain it in a way that you tell a story that makes sense, and it shows your thinking, your reflection, how you approach problem solving, how do you do stakeholder management, how do you get all the people to align on even what color, what button to do, that is a really valuable piece of work in your portfolio. And it's just as, if not more impactful than if you had built something from nothing, because you have real world constraints and you can show that you've worked with the business, you've worked with something that already exists, it's not made up. So in that sense, I feel like you can build a portfolio out of anything, and it's really how you tell that story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, and another question here, kind of on a similar theme, but what soft skills would you recommend for someone to kind of learn or to focus on if they're looking to get a UX role?
I think the biggest like leverage you can get with soft skills is knowing how to communicate. And within that, there are multiple branches, right? So it's knowing how to talk to someone and listen and immediately get what they need, like what they're saying, even if they're not saying it. It's about, if you had to explain to someone your design rationale, knowing how to communicate it and tell that story to get buy-in. And it's about, if you were sharing this externally with other people, so for example, writing case studies, knowing how to recreate that entire story without it being too long or too short. That is a very, very important soft skill that it's not the thing that most people focus on, because early on in the beginning, if you remember that like messy map that I have, in the beginning, it's a lot of craft skills. So you're really focusing on how to do things. But as you start going further along in your journey, the soft skills start to be really important. And for me, I think communication is the one that sort of touches a lot of different places.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, that's great. There's a question here that's caught my eye that I'm interested in as well. So I'm going to ask this one. So what is the best way that you'd recommend to kind of ensure the buy-in of stakeholders who are maybe not too tech savvy, or perhaps, I guess, don't fully buy into UX design or don't fully understand it?
Good question. Two answers. The first one is that might not be your problem. The reality is that design as an industry is undervalued in certain places. We have, had this sort of like misunderstanding of what design is. I still to this day, even in a big company like IKEA that is very design centric, because if you look at the things they sell, it is designed. I have still met people who are like, can you do the UI with no setup, no explanation whatsoever? Like you can just slap on a design. You can just design something. You can just make it look good, make it look pretty. So if you're encountering that sort of sentiment, you do have to make a call. Is this your battle to fight? Do you have the capacity to? Can you actually influence any change? And if you can't, honestly, look for another job. There are so many jobs out there and you'll be okay. So that's like a little disclaimer before I go in. But if you really want to think about buy-in, what I love doing is facilitating. And I do this a lot at IKEA. I did this a lot in the startup. And that's my personal superpower. You can find your own. But I find facilitation really useful because you are sort of setting up the scene for the stakeholders to come to their own conclusions. And nothing is stronger than someone who came up with the idea themselves. Like if they think that they don't, it won't even be like, how do I convince you to do my thing? They came up with the thing themselves. So it's their idea and they'll want to see it succeed. So that's sort of a little workaround I have. And it's an interesting thing because I think stakeholder management and facilitation is not a skill that is widely taught. You kind of have to go through experience. You have to do it by experience. But there are a couple of tools. So like facilitation, workshopping, these are very good ways to do it. But it all comes down, again, communication, right? If you know how to talk about things, it helps.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's really, really helpful. And I totally agree. I think bringing people on the journey and getting them involved in facilitation is all part of it. Okay, great. And I know you just mentioned kind of about jobs there, and there being lots of jobs out there. So I'll ask a related question, which is, how do I find a junior UX UI designer job if all of them require at least 2 years experience?
This is a hot take of mine. I disregard years of experience completely. I think I've only seen it really matter when you come up to like very senior positions. So beyond senior, or if you want to take senior. I think what the years of experience is trying to gauge for is, can you hit the ground running? And if you can you show that in a way that the hiring manager can see it immediately and that the recruiter can even pick up in the first place? So you have multiple checkpoints before you even get a job, right? Before you get a job, in the very first place, someone has to notice you, has to pick your resume out of a pile, has to pick your website out of a pile, has to remember your name and think like, okay, this person can go in. And then you have the interview process where you're trying to convince them that you know what you're doing. And even if you don't, you're able to learn. And then there's the thing where you actually get the job. So like use these checkpoints, and there are a lot of resources, and the UX DI team is great on this to help you sort of frame that and look at your skill set, your strengths, and tailor that process to yourself. I really do think the years of experience, to me, it is not as bad as it sounds. Like everyone puts it, but you have to also bear in mind all these job descriptions are copy paste. They're literally templates. And now with AI, everyone's generating job descriptions. So these things sort of cycle around. And it's one of those things that people say, but they don't really mean. Like all of them have like, it's a mission-driven company, but you have no idea what that means, or like we move fast, or like someone who is not afraid of ambiguity. Like, what does that any of that mean, you know? So it's one of those things, and I wouldn't be too discouraged if you're not getting any bites with your applications. Check in with the team and see how you can overcome that. And if maybe it's learning a couple of skills, maybe it's up leveling a couple of things, but use that as a problem solving thing. You know, treat it as a design problem. You're not getting bites. Why is that? And go backwards from there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Thanks for that, Alexis. Okay, so another question which is based on something that was in your presentation, the "Am I good enough?" question. And somebody is asking, how do you deal with that?
Therapy, food. I feel like that never goes away. I've spoken to head of design, principal level, VP level people who still think that. So I don't think that ever goes away. And I do think it has something to do with the way we are as designers. Like, most of us become designers because we're attracted to, you know, being empathetic to the end user. We're attracted to like problem solving. We're attracted to like beauty and taste, and all these things are a certain personality type, right? And so if you're this type of person, the chances of you being very reflective and very sort of thoughtful, it is probably, it's never going to go away. But I think what you can mitigate it by is, one, of course, reminding yourself that everyone has this, and it's just one of those things that it comes up. But a second thing is to constantly learn and fill in the gaps. So it's a mix of being really reflective and aware of what your strengths are and what your shortcomings are. And then knowing your shortcomings, finding ways to sort of fill that gap. So for example, I am not interested, and I have very little patience for tiny detail designs. So like really thinking about every single use case of a certain flow. I usually do like happy flow, the worst flow, maybe one in between, and then I move on. Whereas I know people who are very thorough, and they really think through every single thing. And that, I think, is a superpower of theirs, but it's a weakness of mine. So like how I'm going about that is I'm learning how to set up frameworks so that I don't, I can't not do it because I've set it in the way I work. So it's being aware about what you're good at, what you're not good at, and tackling that. And hopefully over time, as you start doing more of that, it pulls you out of that loop of being like, I'm not good enough, because you're working on it and it's okay. And someday maybe we'll all be good enough.
Yeah, exactly. I think a breakthrough moment for me was learning that, people, like you said, that are at that top level still have that feeling, and that it's, it's not just you who has it, and it's not something that only happens to junior designers. It happens to everybody, and somehow I got comfort from that, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question here, which is about your transition from architecture, and how was that? And did you have to do, work at both for a while, or how smooth was your transition into UX?
Mine was, for context, it was during the pandemic, and the architecture office let go of more than half the office. So I still had a job at that time, but when you see half the office get laid off, it's quite sobering. So I made that switch quite quickly and deliberately, and sort of didn't look back. But I think the question you're asking with making this switch, it's good to find more stories and hear what other people have done and what it's like for them. But your path is going to be unique, and that's okay. It's not going to look the same, and that's fine. Depending on your situation, if you can afford it, obviously a clean break would be great, because you can dive head first, you can focus on learning, you don't have to think about it. But sometimes the reality is that you can't do that, right? And it's worth being realistic about it. You read all these articles about do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. And it's very black and white. But if you're working in UX design, you should know by now that it's never black and white. And if your circumstance means that you have to hold 2, 3, 4 jobs, then hold 2, 3, 4 jobs. It's do what you have to do to survive, keep your sanity, and just take it a day at a time. I would also say, I get a lot of people messaging me to ask if they should switch to UX design, especially with architecture. And most, like 50% of the time, they don't actually want to do UX. They just think they want to because it's one of the more common ones, or one of the more like written about ones, and they think that's what they want to do. But the design spectrum is so broad. It's not just UX, there's information architecture, there's UX writing, there's content design, content strategy. There's so many different things. So I know that you're probably, if you're thinking about switching, that's on top of mind. But I would say, like, how many times in your life are you going to switch careers? Not that many. So if this is a moment where you're thinking about switching, take a pause and really reflect on what is it you want to switch to, and then worry about like how to do it. But I feel like if you have clarity on what you want to move to and why, this becomes less of a problem that you'll have.
Yeah, definitely. And on that topic, we have somebody who is tuning into the webinar who is actually changing from a graphic designer to a UX UI designer in a startup next month, and they are wondering, do you have any advice?
Congrats. If you have a job now, make sure you have a break for yourself, like go on vacation, or even just like turn off all the Medium articles, turn off LinkedIn, just have a clean break, because I feel like that's really important. And another one is there's a book called First 90 Days. I don't know how we'll link it in the chat. Maybe I can search it really quick now. But that is a book that I've read every single time I transition. And it's not like, it's one of those books you skim through, and every time you read it, it's something different. Got by who, but it's kind of useful, and you can use that to find out what you need to do. But I would say, don't worry about it. The break is more important. Focus on yourself, and then when the time comes and you have to jump into it, then jump into it, and you'll figure it out as you go.
Okay, great. On the flip side, then we have somebody who is they've been running their own business for 20 years, and they're breaking into UX. So they have a lot of experience as a kind of human-computer interaction researcher from years ago. So they have a lot of experience, but they feel like they're being overlooked in applications for being too senior. Would you have any advice on how to manage that?
It's a good problem to have. So caveat, this period that we're in is a particularly bad time for more senior people, especially with the layoffs. You're competing with, like, there's so many people that got laid off, and they work in these fancy companies, right? So if you're struggling, it's not you, it's the economy, and that's okay. But I would say, if you have experience doing HCI research, that is so valuable. I would like look at that and do a little bit of reflection on, like, what is it that you didn't have in your past job that you're looking for now? Because I always question when people say they want to switch into UX design, when I see that they could have such a leverage doing something else. So I would actually suggest, like, take some time off, go get a book and scribble out exactly what is it from your past job that was missing. Why are you switching? And is what you need going to be found as like even a senior UX designer, for example? Is that going to satisfy your need? And then go from there. I feel like that's an interesting chat. If you want, you can reach out to me after, and I'd be more than happy to break that down with you. But yeah, reflect a little bit and really think about why you want to switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's good context for the market right now, and that, you know, people can worry that it's them maybe, but I think the message is always to keep at it and to keep applying. Okay, we have a question here, just comparing what you learned on the professional diploma in UX design, taking that into your, you know, a startup job and now an enterprise. How difficult was it to adapt to kind of the different design processes?
So I took that before I made the switch, actually. So I took that when I was still in architecture. So I also had the freelance experience. And across all of them, I will say that this diploma is a very good backbone, or like a textbook kind of thing to fall back to. I'm personally not very structured. I have this thing where I like doing a lot of new things, and if there's something shiny, I'm like, "Ooh, what's that?" And I get distracted. And so self-learning and, like, not doing a course, it wasn't an option for me, especially with like, I really wanted to make that switch fast. If I had done it myself, I think today I'd still be doing like 20 different things and not really specializing in any one. So that's my reason for taking the diploma and taking like this really structured course. The biggest value that course can give you is just going through the process and having something to fall back on. So knowing that if I do research, this is how I can do it. If I wanted to take the research and move on and analyze it, this is how I would do it. And this is the thing that can come after. So it's just giving you that confidence to know what to expect. And then your learning will then be like, how do I adapt it to the context I'm in? So like, how do I figure out the best way to research within a big company versus how do I do scrappy research really fast in a startup? But then you're not questioning while you're there, how do I research, right? So you're like, the value of doing this kind of things is it's that you change the type of questions that you're asking, and the questions sort of evolve based on the context that you're in.
Definitely. And I think, in the competitive market right now, having, a solid diploma to fall back on to showcase in interviews, it's more important than ever, I think. Okay, so here's a question. Which environment do you prefer, startup or enterprise?
Oh, good question. I don't know. I feel like I sort of swing between both, and that could be my personality type. I'm quite restless, but I've gone over the sort of like challenges and the opportunities that you have from it. So in the startup, it is very intense. A week feels like a month. A month feels like a year. It is very intense, and you're sort of having to do a lot of things, especially if you're in an early stage startup, so like seed, pre-seed, where they don't have much money, and what you do directly impacts that. Like you can see the company slowly fading away, or you can see it growing. So that's really intense. But the plus side is you have the free pass to do whatever. Like you can dictate, you basically are the design team, you're the design culture of the company. You can say like, no, we shouldn't do this type of research because of this, or this is the design system I think we should go for because XYZ. So there's a lot of like agency there to shape things to yourself. In a bigger company, you don't have that freedom per se, because it's a lot about finding out what other people are doing, can we move together, but you'll be exposed to problems at a scale that is like, you can never replicate that, not unless you stay in a business and like build that business for like 30-40 years. And the types of problems that come there are unique and interesting, but you have to kind of be interested in that sort of thing. So I would say at bigger companies, it sort of moves away from design a little bit, and you're starting to really think about business, and at a scale that is very different from what I've seen in other aspects. So like freelance startup, I can still compare it. Big companies, very different. So I didn't answer the question, but I can't answer the question because I don't know. It kind of changes by day. Ask me tomorrow. Maybe it's different.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So there's one here. You've talked about working across different teams, countries, mindsets. How do you manage to share your ideas, for product features in terms of, communication, getting buy-in and agreement? How does that work day to day?
Well, it depends on the company you work at. They will have their own like rituals and ways of working. So you'll have to see what kind of company you go into. Like Spotify, as an example, used to have squads. So it's like a small group of like designers, engineers, and a product person. And now they're moving into something different. And at IKEA, we're having the same sort of reorg in the sense that we're still changing, right? IKEA's digital department is a couple of years old. It's very new. And more than anything, I feel like we're in change management or change transformation. So it will always change. But I think the thing that I want to pick up from that question is like, you're not just at that scale, you're not just thinking about a feature, you're thinking about a problem or an opportunity that goes across multiple teams, across multiple countries. So you're really thinking of solutions that can be scaled. And that's the thing to think about rather than features themselves. But to get buy-in in general, someone asked this question earlier. It's similar in whatever, whether freelance or startup or enterprise. It's about getting the people you're working with to understand and agree on the direction. It's about getting them to understand each other's point of view. It's about, and at the end of the day, it's about you as a designer getting them to understand that what they're doing is for the end user. Someone else will handle the business side, someone else will handle the technical side, whether it's billable. Your job as a designer is to sort of fight for the user. You are representing them, you're representing the experience, and you're representing that whole that whole bubble, right? So I would say focus on that and focus on the experience.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so Alexis, thank you so much for all your answers so far. I promise this will be the last question. We'll finish up with one more. How do you measure success as a UX designer?
Very good question. I highly recommend, if you are interested in this sort of thing, to look up sort of
Okay, I think we might have lost Alexis, but the internet lasted up until the very last 2 minutes, which is great. So while we have lost Alexis, I might just finish up by just sharing for anybody who is interested in the course that Alexis took. I'm just going to share this here.
Hello.
Oh, you're back. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very dramatic. What was the question? Completely lost.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So what we were asking was, how do you measure success as a UX designer?
I think it depends on like what kind of UX designer and what areas you want, right? But I think at the end of the day, being a UX designer, you kind of want to change things. You want to make things better for other people, and that's not always possible. So I feel like yes, you can measure success that way, but it's really about how do you measure success for your own growth. So you can take out the word UX designer and those things will still apply. So I don't really have an answer for that because I think it really depends. But I like to look up, I like to set objectives for myself and sort of see if I can hit them. I like to set learning goals. And if I can hit that, that's sort of how I measure that I'm moving and growing. So a lot of like constant learning.
Yeah.
There's a really nice book that Brianna posted in the chat, articulating design decisions. That's super helpful. Any of the Rosenfeld or like A Book Apart, they all like a lot of people have written about these things, and it's not net new, but it's one of those areas where you kind of have to try it yourself before, like reading won't help. You need to go through it, and then it'll make sense.
Yeah. Well, Alexis, thank you so much for your time this evening and for being so generous with all of your answers and your experience. I know everybody who's been viewing has taken a lot from it, so thank you so much. For anybody who is interested, then I'm just going to share just some information on the course that Alexis took before she transitioned into UX design. This is the Professional Diploma in UX Design. And for anybody who is interested or wondering, please feel free to book in a consultation call with one of our education advisors. This is a free call that you can have to learn a little bit more about the UX industry, so that you can make the best decision about whether UX is the right career move for you and the best way to go about making that career switch. So I will leave this information here. And we will share a link to book a call in the chat box. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and especially thank you, Alexis, for your time.
No worries. One little plug. I generally do like to speak to people. So if you're struggling with something and you want to chat, feel free to reach out. I might not be able to chat with you instantly, but at some point we'll get to it. And it'd be really nice to see the faces that joined today's call and get to know you a little bit. So open pass for you to like reach out.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Alexis.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.